A homeless man entered a church. What happened next? Shocked everyone. "Sir, you can't sit there. The service hasn't started yet." The voice came from a young usher near the back pew. The old man looked up slowly. His coat was ripped, his shoes barely held together, and his beard carried the weight of years spent outside. He smiled gently. "Then I guess I'm early. Sometimes that's better than being forgotten." The usher shifted awkwardly. "You can stay. Just don't fall asleep, all right?" The old man chuckled quietly. "Don't worry, son. I didn't come to sleep. I came to listen." His name was Caleb Harris, a name no one in that church had heard before. He hadn't stepped into a church in over 10 years. His hands were rough, his eyes tired, but there was something about his voice. Calm, broken, and yet full of peace. As the room began to fill, people noticed him. Some stared, others whispered. A few smiled politely, but most turned their eyes away. "Who's that man?" Someone whispered. "Probably looking for money," another replied. Caleb heard it all, but he didn't move. He sat still, eyes fixed on the cross hanging above the altar. When the offering plate came down his row, Caleb reached into his pocket. He had only 1 penny, dull and worn. He looked at it for a moment, smiled, and dropped it into the plate. A woman beside him whispered, "You don't need to give that. Keep it for food." Caleb looked at her kindly. "Ma'am, I can't give what I don't have, but I can still give what I do." The woman blinked, not knowing what to say. The pastor walked onto the stage. His voice was warm and full of life. "Today's message," he began, "is about grace, how it finds us even when we think we're too far gone." Caleb's heart tightened. He whispered to himself, "Too far gone. Yeah, that sounds about right." After the service, as people talked and laughed, Caleb stayed in his seat. He wasn't ready to leave. The pastor noticed him and walked over. "Hey, brother. Haven't seen you before. What's your name?" "Caleb," he said. "I used to come to a church like this a long time ago." The pastor smiled. "What made you stop?" Caleb looked up at the stained glass and sighed. "Life. Sometimes it breaks you so hard you forget how to walk back." Before the pastor could respond, a scream came from the hallway. "Help! Somebody help! My little girl. She's not breathing." The crowd rushed toward the noise. Caleb pushed through, heart pounding. A small girl lay on the ground, limp and pale. People were shouting, frozen in panic. Caleb dropped to his knees beside her. "Give me space," he said firmly. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, then began chest compressions. "Come on, sweetheart. Stay with me." Seconds dragged on. Then, a small cough. The girl gasped for air. Her mother screamed with joy, clutching her child. Everyone stared at Caleb in shock. The pastor whispered, "How did you know what to do?" Caleb looked down at his trembling hands. "I was a paramedic once, before I lost everything." The whole room fell silent, and for the first time that morning nobody looked at Caleb like a stranger. They looked at him like a man who'd just brought someone back to life. And maybe, in a way, he had. That night the pastor handed him a warm blanket. "You can stay here tonight if you'd like." Caleb smiled softly. "Thank you, Pastor. I came here looking for warmth, but I think I found something better." The pastor tilted his head. "What's that?" Caleb whispered, a reason to believe again. And as the church lights dimmed, Caleb lay on the back pew, smiling through tears, whispering into the quiet. "Maybe God never forgot me after all." "You saved my little girl." The voice was soft, shaky. Caleb looked up from the church bench where he sat sipping coffee. The woman from yesterday, the one whose daughter had stopped breathing, stood before him, tears in her eyes, her child holding her hand. The girl smiled shyly. "Hi, mister," Caleb smiled back. "Hey there, sweetheart. You feeling better?" She nodded. "You helped me wake up," he chuckled quietly. "Guess we both woke up." The woman knelt beside him, voice trembling. "I judged you when you walked in. I thought you didn't belong here." "I'm sorry," Caleb shook his head. "It's all right, ma'am. We all got stories we don't understand until we listen." Pastor Ray came over carrying a plate of eggs and toast. "Eat, brother." You've earned a real breakfast." Caleb looked at the food, almost afraid to touch it. "Haven't had something warm like this in years." The pastor smiled kindly. "Then eat. You've fed enough souls already." As Caleb took a slow bite, the pastor asked gently, "You said you were a paramedic. What happened?" Caleb's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. His eyes clouded. For a long moment he said nothing. Then his voice came, low and broken. "I used to have a wife. A boy, too. My whole world. I worked nights on the ambulance, saving people, keeping families together." He paused. "One winter night, there was a crash on the interstate. They called me to respond. When I got there," his lips trembled. "It was their car, Pastor. My wife and son, I tried. Lord knows I tried. But I couldn't save them." The pastor's hand went still on the table. "Oh, Caleb." Caleb wiped his eyes. "After that, I stopped showing up to work. Couldn't look at another patient. Lost my job, my home. The streets were easier than memories." The pastor whispered, "But God wasn't done with you." Caleb gave a sad smile. "I didn't think he'd still want me." That afternoon, the church members gathered to talk. Pastor Ray told them Caleb's story, how he had once been the man who saved lives, and how now he had saved one of their own. The same people who had whispered before now sat silent, ashamed. Finally, the mother stood and said, "We talk about faith every Sunday, but that man lives it. He gave all he had when we gave nothing." From that day, the church began leaving food for Caleb, blankets, even clean clothes. They didn't see a homeless man anymore. They saw a miracle sitting in the back pew. That night, Caleb lay on the same bench, a clean blanket over him, a full stomach for the first time in years. He looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "You took my family, Lord, but maybe you're giving me another one." And for the first time since the accident, he didn't feel alone. "Morning, Caleb." Pastor Ray's cheerful voice echoed through the hallway as the church doors creaked open. Caleb looked up from the broom he was holding. "Morning, Pastor. You sure this place doesn't get dirty on purpose?" Ray laughed. "You keep it cleaner than anyone else ever has. Folks say you take more care of this church than I do." Caleb smiled faintly. "Guess that's 'cause I know what it feels like to have nothing worth taking care of." Weeks passed, and Caleb became part of the church family. He fixed leaky pipes, swept the floors, helped unload food for the soup kitchen. Children ran up to him every Sunday shouting, "Mr. Caleb, tell us another story." He would laugh softly and tell them about the old ambulance days, about courage, kindness, and how miracles sometimes wore human faces. One boy asked, "Were you ever scared?" Caleb smiled. "Every time, son. But bravery ain't about not being scared. It's about helping anyway." The same people who once whispered now waved when they saw him. The usher who first told him, "You can't stay here," now greeted him every morning with, "Good to see you, Brother Caleb," still at night. When the lights went off and the pews went quiet, Caleb often sat in the last row staring at the cross. He'd whisper, "Lord, why me? Why'd you keep me breathing when you took them?" And though the silence gave no answer, he felt peace, a peace that had been missing for years. One Sunday morning, Pastor Ray stood before the congregation. "I've got something special today," he said. "A few months ago, a man walked in here with nothing. But what he gave us is worth more than any offering." He gestured toward Caleb. "Brother Caleb, would you come up here?" Caleb blinked, startled. "Pastor, I don't—" "Come on," Ray said, smiling. "This house is your home, too." Caleb walked slowly to the front. People clapped softly. Pastor Ray placed a hand on his shoulder. "When he came here, we saw a stranger. But God saw a servant. Caleb has reminded us that the church isn't just a building. It's the people who love inside it." The crowd stood, clapping harder this time, some crying, others smiling through tears. Caleb looked around the room, heart pounding. "I thought I'd lost everything," he said quietly. "But standing here, I see I never really did. I just forgot where to look." That night, after everyone left, Pastor Ray found him sitting in the back pew, wiping his eyes. "You okay?" the pastor asked. Caleb smiled. "Yeah, Pastor. I'm just remembering what grace feels like. Caleb, can I ask you something? Pastor Ray leaned against the office door, smiling. Caleb looked up from the mop bucket. If it's about me mopping too much, guilty as charged. Ray chuckled. No, brother. It's about purpose. You ever think about working again? Caleb froze for a moment. Work? Yeah, the pastor said. There's a local clinic looking for help. Nothing fancy, just organizing supplies and checking stock. You've got experience, heart, and time. That's all they need. Caleb looked down at his rough hands. You really think they'd hire me? Ray nodded. I think they'd be lucky to have you. A week later, Caleb stood outside the clinic in a borrowed button-up shirt. His palms were sweaty, his shoes still old but polished as best he could. He took a deep breath and whispered, All right, Lord, let's try this again. Inside, a young nurse smiled. You must be Mr. Harris. Pastor Ray told us all about you. Caleb grinned nervously. I hope he told the truth. Days turned into weeks, and Caleb quickly became everyone's favorite. He organized supplies, fixed lights, and always had a kind word ready for anyone who needed it. You move like you've done this before, one nurse said. Caleb smiled softly. Old habits die hard. He didn't tell them that every box of bandages reminded him of the ambulance, or that every sound of a siren outside still made his heart ache. But he was finally living again. One afternoon, as he was cleaning the hallway, he heard a familiar voice. Excuse me. Could you tell me where the pharmacy is? Caleb turned, and his heart nearly stopped. Standing there was James, his old partner from the ambulance unit. James? Caleb's voice trembled. James froze. Caleb? My God! I thought you were dead. They stared at each other for a long moment. Caleb finally said, Might as well have been. James stepped closer. I looked for you after the crash. You just vanished, Caleb sighed. Didn't see much reason to stick around. I failed them, James. James shook his head, eyes wet. No, brother. You didn't. It wasn't your fault. I was there. You did everything right. Sometimes even our best isn't enough. Caleb looked away. That's what I tell people. But believing it's different. James smiled sadly. Maybe that's why God brought you back here to you, not to fix the past, but to forgive yourself. Caleb blinked back tears. You still pray, James? Not like I should, he said. But after seeing you again, maybe I will. That night Caleb sat alone in the church. The candles flickered softly. He whispered, Lord, I've forgiven everyone but myself. Please teach me how. And for the first time the silence felt warm, like an answer without words. He looked up at the cross and smiled faintly. All right then, maybe I'll stop running now. You're the man who fixed my brother's bike, right? Caleb turned and saw a little boy standing outside the church steps, holding a bag of groceries. He smiled. That was me. Why, you got another one broken already? The boy giggled. No, Mama said I should thank you. You didn't even take money. Caleb knelt down to the boy's level. Son, when you've been given a second chance, you stop counting what you get and start giving what you can. The boy grinned and ran off. Pastor Ray, who'd been watching from the doorway, crossed his arms and smiled. You know you've become famous, right? Caleb chuckled. I'd rather stay invisible. Famous people get expectations. Ray laughed. Too late for that, brother. The town's calling you Mr. Hope. The name spread fast. Caleb's story. The homeless man who saved a child, found faith again, and turned his pain into service, reached the local newspaper. Soon, people began visiting the church, not to pray for themselves, but to help others. A mechanic offered free oil changes to struggling families. A restaurant owner brought hot meals for anyone hungry. Kids collected blankets for the homeless shelter. It all started with one man who had nothing, and gave everything. One afternoon, the mayor visited the church. Pastor Ray, is Mr. Harris here? Caleb looked up from the broom, startled. Yes, ma'am. That's me, she smiled warmly. Sir, this town owes you more than we can say. Your kindness started a wave of hope. We'd like to honor you next Sunday. A community award. Caleb shook his head quickly. No, no awards, please. The mayor tilted her head. Why not? He smiled humbly. Because the moment I start believing I'm special, I'll forget why I'm here. I don't want praise. I want peace. She nodded slowly. Then we'll just thank you our own way. That night, the church was fuller than ever. Families sang louder, strangers hugged longer, and laughter filled the air. As Caleb stood in the back pew, watching everyone, Pastor Ray joined him. See what you started? He said softly. Caleb smiled. I didn't start anything, Pastor. I just remembered what love looks like. Ray nodded. And you reminded the rest of us. After service, a teenage boy approached Caleb, eyes red. Sir, my dad left last year. I was angry at everyone. But then I heard your story. If you could forgive life, maybe I can forgive him. Caleb placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Son, forgiving doesn't erase the hurt. It just keeps the hurt from owning you. The boy nodded, crying quietly. Thank you. Caleb looked up at the glowing cross above the stage and whispered, Maybe this is what you meant, Lord. Beauty from ashes. That night, before locking up, Caleb whispered into the quiet church. You didn't just bring me in from the cold. Lord, you made me warm again. And outside, the bells rang, echoing through the town, a sound of healing that started with one broken man who finally learned how to love again. Pastor, there's smoke down by Main Street. The shout came from one of the choir boys running into the church. Pastor Ray and Caleb rushed outside. A crowd had already gathered at the corner. The old shelter across from the grocery store was on fire. Flames tore through the windows. Smoke rose thick into the sky. Caleb's heart dropped. There are people in there. Ray grabbed his arm. Caleb, wait! But it was too late. Caleb was already running toward the building. Inside, heat clawed at his face, smoke filling his lungs. Anybody here? He yelled, coughing. He heard a faint cry, a woman's voice. Help, my son, he's stuck. Caleb pushed forward, covering his mouth with his sleeve. He found the woman crouched under a broken beam, clutching a little boy who was pinned. It's all right, Caleb said, his voice calm and steady. I've got you. He heaved the beam aside, gritting his teeth against the pain. The woman grabbed her son and ran for the door. Please come with us, she cried. But Caleb turned back. There might be more. The fire roared behind him, closing in. He stumbled through the smoke, calling out again and again. No answer. His legs felt weak. Just as his vision blurred, a strong hand grabbed his shoulder. Pastor Ray. Come on, brother. We're leaving. Together they stumbled out just as the roof collapsed behind them. Caleb lay on the sidewalk, coughing, his skin darkened with soot. The crowd clapped and cheered, calling his name. The little boy he'd saved ran up, crying. You're a hero. Caleb smiled weakly, voice hoarse. I'm just a man who didn't want anyone else to die alone. The paramedics rushed over, checking his vitals. One of them said quietly, Sir, you need to rest. You took in a lot of smoke. Caleb laughed softly. I've been through worse. Pastor Ray knelt beside him, gripping his hand. You scared me, Caleb, he smiled. Don't worry, Pastor. God's not done with me yet. That night, the town gathered at the church to pray for the victims, and for Caleb, who had risked his life again to save strangers. Pastor Ray stood before the crowd. When this man first walked through our doors, we saw a broken soul. But God saw his hands, hands meant to save, to build, to bless. Tonight, those same hands reminded us what faith looks like in real life. The people bowed their heads, tears flowing freely. Later, in the quiet of the hospital room, Caleb lay awake staring at the ceiling. Pastor Ray sat beside him. You did good, brother, Ray said softly. Caleb smiled faintly. Didn't do it for thanks, Pastor, just for love, Ray nodded, his eyes wet. And that's why your name's going to live in this town forever. Caleb chuckled weakly. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I ain't going anywhere yet. But in his heart, he knew the truth. Every breath he took felt heavier than the last. Still, he whispered, if this is how it ends, Lord, I'm glad it's here, in the light, not the cold. He's awake. The nurse's voice carried through the quiet hospital room. Caleb blinked slowly, the world coming back into focus. Pastor Ray sat beside him, head bowed in prayer. When he heard the sound, he looked up fast, smiling through tears. "Hey there, brother," Ray said softly. "You gave us quite a scare." Caleb smiled weakly. "Guess God ain't done with me yet," Ray chuckled. "You really believe that?" Caleb nodded. "After all this?" "Yeah, Pastor. I do." 2 days later, the hospital allowed visitors. But what walked through Caleb's door wasn't just a few friends, it was half the town. The woman he saved in the fire came first, holding her little boy's hand. "Mr. Caleb," she said through tears, "you saved our lives." "We don't have words for what you did," Caleb smiled faintly. "You already said it. You're alive. That's all that matters." Then came the kids from the church, each carrying small cards with colorful crayon hearts. A girl read hers aloud. "Thank you for teaching us to be brave." Caleb's eyes filled. "You kids already are." Pastor Ray stood near the doorway, his voice thick with emotion. "You see what's happening, Caleb. You thought you were forgotten, but you've become the heartbeat of this town." Caleb looked around, shaking his head slowly. "I didn't do this, Pastor. God just gave me the pain. The rest of you turned it into love." The room went quiet. Even the nurses wiped their eyes. That Sunday, the church was packed. The choir sang louder than ever. Pastor Ray walked to the pulpit with tears already in his eyes. "Family," he said, "you know our brother Caleb can't be here today, but he's watching from his hospital bed, and he asked me to read something." He unfolded a letter written in shaky handwriting. "To everyone who once saw me as a stranger, thank you for letting me be part of your family. You showed me that home isn't a place, it's people. If my life taught you anything, let it be this. Kindness costs nothing, but it heals everything." The church went silent. Then, one by one, people began to stand, clapping, crying, some shouting, "Amen!" That evening, as Pastor Ray brought the recording to Caleb's hospital room, he pressed play on his phone. The sound of hundreds of voices filled the small space, the same church that once looked away now singing, crying and thanking him. Caleb listened, eyes closed, smiling through tears. "That's beautiful," he whispered. "You tell them." "I love them all." Ray held his hand tight. "They already know." Caleb turned his head toward the window where sunlight streamed through. "Funny, Pastor," he said quietly. "I came here just to warm up. But God set my soul on fire instead. Pastor Ray?" The nurse stood at the doorway, her voice quiet. "He's resting now, peacefully." Ray felt his chest tighten. "Can I see him?" She nodded gently. He walked into the hospital room. Caleb lay still, his face calm, a faint smile on his lips. The sunlight from the window painted his skin gold. His old Bible rested on his chest, just as it had the day he first came to the church. Pastor Ray sat down beside him and whispered, "You did it, brother. You finished your race." He bowed his head. "Thank you for reminding all of us what faith really means." The next Sunday, the church was full. Standing room only. People from every corner of town came to say goodbye. Children held flowers. Mothers cried softly. Men who'd never been inside a church before stood with their hats pressed to their hearts. Pastor Ray stepped to the pulpit, his voice trembling. "A year ago, a homeless man walked into this church. He had nothing, no money, no home, no hope, but he gave us everything that mattered." He paused, glancing at Caleb's empty pew in the back. "When Caleb came, we saw a man broken by life, but God saw a man ready to rebuild others. He didn't preach from a pulpit. He preached with his heart, and every one of us here carries a piece of his sermon." The crowd bowed their heads, silent except for the sound of sniffles. After the service, they unveiled something new in the church courtyard, a stone bench beneath the stained glass window. Carved into it were Caleb's own words. "Church isn't walls. It's hearts." The little girl, whose life he had saved years before, placed a single white flower on the bench. "Goodbye, Mr. Caleb," she whispered. Pastor Ray smiled softly. "He's not gone, sweetheart. He's just home." Months later, the town opened a new building beside the church, a shelter for the homeless. Above the entrance, a sign read, "The Caleb Harris Center, a place for new beginnings." Every night, lights glowed from its windows and people walked in cold and alone, just like he once had, and walked out warm and seen. That winter, when the snow fell, Pastor Ray stood outside the shelter and looked up at the sky. He whispered, "You came in from the cold, Caleb, and left us all on fire." And as the bells of the church rang softly through the night, every sound felt like a heartbeat, the echo of a man who had nothing but love and gave it until his last breath. Morale of the story: you don't need riches to change the world, just a heart that still believes in kindness, because sometimes the people with the least to give the most of all.